Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. It's 17 defeats in 33 games for Ruben Amorim's Manchester United. How much more misery can they really take? With us today, we have our Monday usual, Adam Crafton. We've also got Ollie K, who was at the G-Tech over the weekend as well. Right, headline numbers, Ollie. 17 defeats from 33 Premier League games. Are we even at all surprised now when Manchester United lose?
You're not surprised when they lose, but I do seem to fall into the trap of thinking before almost every game, they should be all right today, shouldn't they? You know, you look at the team sheet and it looks okay. I don't think it looks great by any means. As you've got the questions about the system, you've got questions about numerous individuals within it, but you think it looks okay. It shouldn't be that hard to, you know, go to some of these grounds and get a win. I know Brentford is all, you know, our awkward opponents, but I still find myself surprised that, you know, I don't rate anything that they do. I don't rate their transfer policy. I don't rate the decision makers. I don't rate many of the individual players. I don't rate the system. I big question marks about the coach, but I'm still amazed by how poor they are a lot of the time. That was the worst performance, worst Premier League performance of the season by some distance. I think it's probably worth saying there have been moderately better performance-wise this season, but they are so far from where they need to be and where you know they should be.
Yeah, Adam, they still haven't won back-to-back Premier League matches under Amorim. He's been there, nearly a year now. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, the numbers are terrifying. I mean, it's like 2 points from their last 8 away games. It's incredible in many ways. I woke up on Saturday morning at 7:50 a.m. in America. Man United were already 2-0 down against Brentford. Right? Like, there is something quite kind of jolting about that when you just sort of reach out for your phone at the side of the bed, check the score, thinking, "Oh, can't be that bad yet." And then you check, you're like, oh my God. So there is still something a bit jolting about it, even if we come to expect it. I remember being at the game at Brentford a couple of years ago, Ten Hag's third game, was it, when they lost 4-0. And that was probably I think it was like 3-0 at half time. And that was horrendous. But in some ways, actually, the game the other day felt bleaker in the sense of, I think that Chelsea game last week had not given the sense of a change, but had given the sense of maybe it could be the start of something. And then for it kind of just to tumble back down to earth within 20, 25 minutes, within 7 days, it is pretty bleak. And then when you add in, all this stuff about there's no European football this season, so they're going to have a whole week of training, they'll be ready. How can you start a game at Brentford like that then? If you've had a whole week to prepare? How can you be so shocked by, the goals they concede, like a ball over the top? How can't you expect that going to Brentford? So it just raised a lot of questions that, I think has probably led many people to feel this sense of loop and inevitability about what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks.
And the thing where we talk about this back-to-back, this lack of back-to-back wins as if it's some kind of remarkable quirk. I mean, they've won 9 games out of 33, so it's probably if you're winning slightly better than 1 game every 4, you're not going to win back-to-back games. It's not the back-to-back thing isn't a problem. You could not win back-to-back games, and I think Arsenal didn't win more than 3 back-to-back games last season, and they finished second. But it's the fact that they're winning 1 game in 4. They basically win 1 game a month. I'm looking at it here. 1 game in February, 1 game in March, none in April, 1 in May, 1 in August, 1 in September. And there's always this feeling that, they beat Chelsea and like, the pressure's off. We've made it through another week. We made it through another month. And then they have a big game at Brentford the following week, and they're 2-0 down within 20 minutes. And it's incredible how low the standards are in terms of the expectations, but also how it looks like the standards are incredibly low in terms of what the players expect of themselves and each other as well.
I was looking at this before the podcast. If you go back to February 24 across 1.5 seasons exactly, so you take 38 games, 19 games of the previous season. Well, obviously Ten Hag was there as well, but a lot of the players overlap. They've won 17 of their last 57 Premier League games. Like, that's less than 1 in 3, as Ollie says. But in that time, I think something that's really interesting is Brighton, Villa and Everton, and by the way, 2 of those games were the final days of the season, are the only current Premier League teams United have beaten by more than 1 goal in that time. So that shows that even the games that they win tend to be by hook or by crook a little bit as well. There's not that many games they've won in that time where you came away thinking, wow, Man United really played well there. And obviously that'll work the other way as well. There'll be games where you're unlucky or whatever, or you draw. But the performance level over almost 60 games there has been consistent. And it gets to a point where it's not underperforming. It's not Man United aren't doing this, that. It's just what they are, who they are. And it's pretty striking.
Can I ask you something then? You've watched Ten Hag's Manchester United, especially when he joined. You've now seen Amorim's Manchester United. Adam, who put you more at ease to watch this team? Was there a sense of optimism, perhaps, when Ten Hag started in comparison to now what we're seeing with Amorim?
Well, I think I might have said on this podcast towards the end of Ten Hag that it's impossible for anyone to do worse. Because people kept saying, who's out there that could do, that's better at the time. And I just remember thinking, who could be worse? Because it was, Man United were finishing, 8th, 9th under Ten Hag. I mean, even the fact that, Man United have gone into this season thinking, or a lot of fans, I think, have thought, might be 8th, might be 9th. It's shocking relative to the spend that they have and the wages that they put out. There is no other club in Europe with that level of revenue generation or spend on wages that would come anywhere near to even thinking about that being acceptable. And yeah, of course, things take time and you have to allow things to transition. To answer your question, I think they're both deeply flawed in different ways. The Ten Hag had clearly lost some of the players, by his second season. But also, I think what they probably share in common is the midfield being very exposed, personnel not being strong enough. I think Ten Hag probably, never really quite got past the Casemiro problem, it was too open, asking him to do too much. At the time, it looked like Kobbie Mainoo might be able to be a player that you could put in there next to Casemiro, perhaps, and that tightens it up a bit. But even when he played at times, it would be too open. And maybe it's actually, you go back a few years and maybe it is a bit of a Bruno Fernandes problem as well, in terms of, is there actually a midfield combination that allows, Fernandes to have the freedom he wants while also having a team that's able to compete towards the top of the Premier League table? Maybe that's unfair because he's done so much individually. And obviously the Amorim, there's problems all over Amorim's team. I mean, like the Mason Mount left wing back thing on Saturday, where you're chasing a game late on and he took off. I can't remember which centre back he took off because it's always it feels like he's always taking off a centre back at some point in the second half. I can't remember which one it was, but he brought Mason Mount on and I thought, wow, he's changed this, 20 minutes to go or whatever, and he's changed the system. He's going to put Luke Shaw at left back and they're going to go 4-2-3-1 or 4-2-2-2 or whatever. And it was Mason Mount at left wing back. And it's just, I think at that point, players are probably thinking, what are we doing here? How is this giving us the best chance of winning the game?
Yeah. Ollie, after the game, Amorim said post-match that, United never got into their rhythm. I mean, this is a team that's had a pre-season, and there's also the argument that obviously maybe he doesn't have the team or the personnel to basically function the way he wants to. But you try telling that to Iraola for Bournemouth, who's lost a whole heap of players last season. You try telling that to, Brighton, or even, above Manchester United right now, Brentford.
Or Sunderland, or whoever. I was fascinated when he made that point about we hadn't been able to play on our own game. We'd fallen into the trap of playing on Brentford's terms, and he'd spoken about how the problem had been that they'd not really sort of built up a spell of possession, a controlled possession. I thought, all right, so that's what they're trying to do, is it? Is it that's what he wants his team to do, because they very rarely do that. So I was always surprised to hear that building a spell of possession was the game plan, really. But also when they kicked off, and it was, you're right in front of, right in line with it in the press box at Brentford, and they had, I think, 6 or 7 players stationed on that left wing, ready for when Bayindir kicked the ball long forward into that corner, so that they could all sort of chase it, like they were kind of, Wimbledon in 1988 or Sheffield United in 1990 or something like that. And it's what all teams are doing at the moment. Well, not all teams, but a lot of teams are doing this, and they're sort of getting these kick-off routines where it's all about punching it into the corner and trying to force a throw in, and it looks like you're watching rugby at times. But but that long ball from Bayindir, it was headed away by, I think it was Nathan Collins, and suddenly United had all these 6 or 7 players in that corner, and they were almost hit on the counter-attack straight away in the first 10, 20 seconds of the game, because Brentford went down the left, and it was as if Brentford had prepared for that and knew that was going to happen. But my big concern with it was, if your aim is to get control and possession and try and feel your way into a game, that they didn't do that at any stage, really. And if you're punting it long from the kickoff, and I admit other teams are doing it as well, but what better opportunity is there to sort of build your way into game, get those sort of building blocks of possession? It strikes me as baffling. There's so little I can understand what the system is meant to be, which it just doesn't look like. I don't like the system, but you can understand what it's meant to be. But when you say we want to build possession, and then you just don't seem to have any clue how to do that or when to do that, it's baffling.
Yeah, well, Ruben Amorim has overseen 49 games in all competitions. Adam, is there any sign of improvement or even progress under Amorim? Because there are some underlying numbers people would draw to and say high XG, more shot on goals, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is the results are still the results.
Yeah, I mean, even this season, okay, some of the numbers are better, but, the Arsenal game aside, I think there's been cause for concern in pretty much every other game. Even the Chelsea one last week, they went from looking like they were going to win 6-0 when they went 2-0 up to looking as though they could implode by the end. So even the inconsistency within games at times is pretty shocking. I think he is under pressure, much more pressure, I think, than the club would maybe like people, to be saying probably at this point. I struggle to see a way that, if he was to lose against Sunderland next week, I struggle to imagine it can go on much longer than that, to be honest. I don't think it's when you get to these times as a journalist, you're talking to lots of people, you're trying to get a sense of where you think the club is at. I think from some of the people I'm speaking to, I think the first rumblings of this cycle that we've become so familiar with are starting. Does that mean he's going to get fired immediately? No. Does it mean that there are, people starting to think about what might happen next? Of course they are, and they wouldn't be doing their job if they weren't doing that. You could argue they wouldn't have been doing their job if they weren't doing that 6 months ago after the Europa League final, even, to be frank. So I think Ruben Amorim himself has spoken about, at times, it not being good enough, the fact that he might walk away, the fact that he might do, 2 months or 20 years, whichever day you happen to speak to him. So, I don't think there's any disguising at this point. You can't deny the results. You can't deny the performances. Yeah, things were a bit better, but not to the extent that makes you think this is a project that's going to get Man United to where they need to be. And there is also a financial imperative here. A year ago, or less than a year ago, Jim Ratcliffe's talking about the club going bust by Christmas. If they were to go out of Europe, and then they went and spent a hell of a lot of money in the transfer market, but if they were to to go another season without any European qualification whatsoever, that is really impactful for Man United. That is, from a sponsorship point of view, from a ticketing point of view, the match day revenue that you get, this season, even just not being in the Carabao Cup, having been knocked out by Grimsby, I'm pretty sure United would have budgeted to get to quarterfinals, semi-finals of that competition. To be having 2 or 3, okay, you can have all the draws go away, but that's unlikely. But to be having 2 or 3 home games, so that's looking at another 3, 4, 5 million pound that they've not got. So every time he has some of these bad results, there is an impact. Every place in the table is worth millions of pounds. So I don't think they'll let this go, without being checked for too much longer.
Yeah, I mean, Ollie, from where you were sitting, especially with the visiting fans, what feeling were you getting off them? Were there any noises anti-Amorim, or were they just like yet another day as a Man United fan?
No, and there's not really been any chance or anything like that against any of the managers Manchester United have had in the last 12 years, all of whom have been through really, really tough times, really bleak periods where it seemed, and as it transpired, there was no way back. United's fans have never turned on their manager. They've barely turned on their players. I think that's really admirable, personally. I love the fact that they don't sort of hound the manager and fall down the you don't know what you're doing route that is so kind of lazy default option amongst supporters these days. But I know there's a element of United's fan base who probably don't go to games who are livid that the fans have been chanting for Amorim all this time and staying loyal when they see no encouragement. What is interesting is that there's been this sort of defiant, we'll back him from the Stretford end chant, he'll bring the glory days again, whatever it is. There was none of that. There was none of that on Saturday. It was United's fans, who were normally very, very loud, some of the loudest away fans around. They were flat on Saturday. They seemed pretty resigned. I think a lot of them had gone by the end, whether after the third goal or just before it. And yeah, I think there's a real mood of resignation amongst the fans at the moment, because I don't think anybody wants to be in this position where they're changing manager yet again. I don't think there's much appetite for to be entering October, November again and thinking, oh, it's yet another season where we're changing manager so soon. Is it going to be another interim? Is it going to be another just season wasted, sleepwalking towards the end of the season? There's been so much of that at United the last 7-8 years, really. I don't know where they go from here. I mean, if we say, I think Adam and I both agree that it's very hard at the moment to see a way out of this Amorim, whether it's whether he's got 2 more months or 2 more weeks, whatever. It's very hard. You have to start thinking, what's the contingency plan here? What do they do next? And I just don't think it's an obvious answer. I think if Amorim seemed like an obvious thing to do this time last year, I think it's partly because they've gone all in on Amorim, and partly because it's the personnel changes. You think, have they now got to go to a coach who plays a back three? Now that, to me, would be madness. But I also think flipping to a coach who wants to go to a back four isn't great either.
You're right, Ollie. What is interesting, and I think this might become significant, is I think there's a lot of managers who are going to become available next summer as things currently stand. So it would be after the World Cup, which presents its own issues in terms of how you would keep that quiet, or do you announce it, and the chaos that can ensue around that. But Tuchel, Ancelotti, Pochettino, Julian Nagelsmann, they're all managers that become available next summer. Add on top of that, contracts for both Oliver Glasner and Iraola are up next summer. And that makes me wonder whether Man United, like it could get so bad they'd have to pull the trigger, or do they try and muddle through as long as they can with Amorim and end up with a kind of interim until you have that kind of really good set of options available next summer, rather than trying to get someone mid-season. I think there's also, there's obviously costs involved with that. I think getting someone who's going to do a World Cup would be impossible. But equally, you would be able to buy Oliver Glasner or Iraola, and I think there's plenty of people who would say Manchester United should act like a big club and go and get the best person. So that makes me wonder whether we get to another stage with United where we end up with an interim.
On that point, I mean, those are great names you've put forward. If you were in their shoes right now, do you want to go to Manchester United? I know there's an ego around being a manager and trying to bring this team back to former glory, but I mean, you can look down the entire line of pretty talented people who it just hasn't worked out for.
Yeah, but I think they would. Yeah, that's what we see, I think, over the years. I mean, I was with on Friday, name dropping, someone who said no, which was Jurgen Klopp.
Oh, wow.
And that was, on Friday, and he at the start of the interview, he said to me, who do you support? Or where are you from in England? So I said Manchester, and he was like, I said to him, imagine if you'd have come all those years ago. And he was thinking back to when it was, and it was just after. Exactly. Wow.
Boom.
But it was after David Moyes, left, that when he was having those discussions, and I think most people in the game, would say, and he had a lot of fun poking fun at how Manchester United are doing, but he was saying, I don't think I'm betraying anything here, was basically, every time you think it might get better, it just sort of goes back again. And it's fascinating. But I do think most coaches out there, the comparison I always use is like Leeds United in the Championship, where they would be run by, at times, pretty crazy owners, but decent managers. I think that's the legalistic term. But managers would still say yes.
Yeah.
You would still have managers going in because of the name, because of what you could be if you're the person who turns it round. In the same way as, what Jurgen Klopp became by being the man who turned Liverpool around, after all those years, at a point where it seemed like they'll never win the league again. So I don't think we're at a stage yet where a lot of coaches at Bournemouth and Crystal Palace would be saying no. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. What about this in terms of, this is a Sir Jim Ratcliffe appointment, really, at least with his Ineos group at the helm, Ollie. Is there a bit of saving face here that actually, something's got to give? We've got to actually stick by this guy because, this was meant to be our massive new appointment.
Yeah, but wasn't Dan Ashworth meant to be one of his sort of flagship appointments? And Dan Ashworth's sort of last significant act in a few months in that role was to question whether it made sense to go to appoint a back three coach like Amorim mid-season. And and Ashworth was quickly shown the door. So that's I think the thing with Ratcliffe is he's appointed all these people. He's appointed Omar Barada, and that was sort of widely hailed as some incredible coup to get him from Manchester City. He appointed Ashworth. That didn't last. He appointed a new coach. He appointed Jason Wilcox, technical director, now director of football. All these other sort of appointments low down the chain. And it reminds me slightly of something Adam said on a podcast, probably, would it be 2-3 years ago, about United, and he was saying how, right, well, they've got Richard Arnold. I said Richard Ashcroft. I was at Wembley. Richard Arnold. Richard Arnold. The drugs don't work. Richard Arnold was sort of chief executive and learning on the job. You had Solskjaer, who was coach and basically learning on the job. You had John Murtagh, technical, director of football, was learning on the job. They were all doing jobs at Manchester United that were far bigger jobs than they'd done before. And Omar Barada wasn't the CEO at Manchester City. But he's gone into what everybody regards as a bigger club, and he's chief executive and he's running the shop. And he's got, Ratcliffe himself has had very little success in football, and Nice have seemed to do better since him and Ineos have backed away. Jason Wilcox was academy director at Manchester City 12 months before he turned up at Manchester United. He went to director of football at Southampton, and look, I think he's got a good reputation in the game, but I don't think anybody would think, based on his work at Southampton, that's the guy you want to be sort of running the show at Manchester United in terms of the whole football operation. There's big question marks about Barada, big question marks about Wilcox, and inevitably, their entire sort of credibility really is pinned on the success or otherwise of a coach who is learning on the job in the Premier League. Obviously, he's had great success in Portugal, but it looks to me like that will go down as a pretty disastrous appointment. And what that says about Ratcliffe's other appointments, chief executive, director of football departed, director of football new depart. I mean, it's big questions there, aren't there? Big questions about Jim Ratcliffe, whether you would trust him to make the right decision now, whatever that might be, whether you get the next decision right. I think there are, again, like we talked about with managers, I think it was an incredibly low bar for Jim Ratcliffe and for his regime to come in and make things better at Manchester United. They've not made things better. They've made things worse.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is, Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos have also said if they need to change things, they'll do it quite quickly. Which brings me to the question, Adam, and by the way, I'm not stating that Amorim's going to go anytime soon, but do you stick or twist with this guy? Because you've got the October international break coming up. Do you stay with this guy till January, see what happens? Can you afford to do that?
Well, can you afford to not do that? Can you afford to spend the money to fire him? I mean, you would think it would probably be it might be in the interest long term to take that hit, and but we've said that so many times now. I mean, it's probably over 50 million that United have probably spent firing coaches now over the last few years or so. There used to be that stat about Chelsea that it was like how many the numbers they'd racked up firing coaches. I think Ollie's right about how tied some of the people above Amorim are to his success, about how their credibility is tied to their success. And I do wonder if I think that kind of fusion meant that this season was going to go one or two ways. It was either going to kind of propel United almost like a rocket ship, because there was this kind of interdependency, or it was going to go really, really badly because everyone is looks tied to one another. So maybe that buys him a bit of time, because actually, really the most compelling case, the only case I can really see at the moment, short of evidence on the pitch, for sticking with Amorim is the fact they fired other coaches before and they don't want to do it again. So it's less about anything he's actually doing, more the pattern of what has gone before. And this kind of feeling of it is embarrassing for the people who hired him to fire him. That they would face questions about what on earth were you doing? What on earth were you doing? Because almost a year before, when Jim Ratcliffe came in, I remember being at this kind of roundtable he did with journalists at the Ineos HQ, where he said, we will hire a sporting director who will set out the style of football. This was like February, March 2024. And by the end of that year, they had someone brought in who didn't seem, who was bringing his own style, signing players for his style. I know they say, that Cunha and Buemo can play in different systems. Okay. But the reality is if someone comes in and plays 4-2-3-1 next week, they don't have enough wingers. They've got rid of Rashford, Garnacho. Cunha would probably have to play from the left, not his preferred position. So they have, they wouldn't really have a left back. to be honest, because I don't think Dorgu would be able to play in a 4, and maybe Shaw probably can't get up and down in the way he could a few years ago. So certainly on the evidence of the last few games. So I think the questions that would follow, again, about, it's almost like you would need to spend 200 million to fix the last 200 million. And it's just this cycle we've heard forever and ever. So if there's anything that buys Ruben Amorim time, I think it is that, because there isn't a huge deal of evidence that the players he has are improving. You know, I know this is some people might not want to relitigate what happened in the summer, but did they get as much money as they could have got for Alejandro Garnacho? Should Marcus Rashford be out on loan? You know, obviously that's due to a contract that was given before Ineos, but in terms of, you know, the money that it's cost, this whole Amorim project, in terms of what could have been brought in, even if you think about, you know, they had a record offer from Amazon to do a behind-the-scenes documentary. Amorim didn't want to do it.
Oh, if only,
right? But Ruben Amorim, understandably, by the way, I don't think this was a misjudgment on his part, but he didn't want to do it. That's probably another 10 to 15 million. You know, the club will say in the end it was a joint decision, but it was very much, you know, because Ruben Amorim wasn't comfortable with it. And as I say, I can completely understand it. But if you just tot up all these kind of cumulative costs that this project, you know, the cost of firing Ten Hag and hiring Amorim was like 23 million, you know, it's interesting. You know, and I think all of that breeds a scenario which maybe buys him some time, but it's not really on account of anything he is actually doing now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, Adam, I'm going to give you the opportunity to cleanse your Manchester United soul right now. Shake it off, because it's time for the final whistle. You've got 60 seconds, brother. Let's actually see if we can beat the whistle this time. You're really good at this. And we want to know what in the world of football has really touched you this week. So your 60 seconds starts now.
I'm not sure it's touched me, but I'm going to do Wrexham, who spent over £33 million in the summer. I think that could go even higher with all the different add-ons. And that's only 2 clubs in the whole of the EFL spent more than that. And after 7 games, they are 15th in the Championship. And the next 5 games, they have Leicester, who were relegated. Then they have Birmingham, who spent, I think, probably even more. And then they have the top 2, Middlesbrough and Coventry, as well, within the next 5 games. And I wonder whether that very long journey and successful journey that Phil Parkinson's been on, sadly, might be under threat. I know Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds, it was put to me recently, they think he walks on water, Phil Parkinson, and maybe he does after all he's achieved there. But I think that is a situation to watch in the coming weeks.
Nice. Stop there. 50 seconds. Pretty good. You had a bit more time, 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Take it.
Could have done more fluff.
You should have fluffed it as you usually do, yeah?
I would never have managed that. Jeez.
What? Yeah, you can do it in a minute.
60 seconds.
You can't speak in a minute, Ollie. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
All right, let's leave it there, gents. Appreciate your time, Adam, Ollie. And also, if you're enjoying the show, make sure you leave us a comment and also subscribe to the channel as well. We'll catch you next time. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.